So he told you that he believed that he would not get that deal if he didn't testify the way he did. And again, you can go back and you can look, because that's what he said. Did he lie about something? Well, his story in the course of this entire thing has changed. I can't count. I tried with him to go through a lot of it, the changes he made. But I think it was at least 4 or 5 times that he changed his story. And I went through with him pretty thoroughly his entire interview with the police. And he told you that when he first got picked up, he thought it was because of a traffic warrant. And that's what he told the police, or that's what he didn't tell you, he told the police that. He admitted that was a lie, but he told the police that he thought he was getting picked up for a traffic warrant. And then, when they pressed him, he said, well, maybe it's got something to do with my cousin, or my cousin's husband, who got shot. But I wasn't involved in that. And then when they pushed him more and told him they had evidence that proved he did it, he changed the story and he said, well, I sold him the weed, but I wasn't involved in anything after that. And then when they told him, well, we spoke with Keisha Evans, who testified, she said that you called her and you said that this had gone down and you weren't sure if you shot Corey or not. And then he said, well, yeah, I mean, there was we were paid in counterfeit money and I was mad. But at that point, he was still alone in his story, and he says that he found out the money was counterfeit when he got home. That was later changed to, well, yeah, I found out it was counterfeit in the car, and then I chased him down. And then, well, yeah, they got shot, but it wasn't me. And then Ivan was with me, but I didn't see a gun on Ivan. And then it was, you're being arrested for murder, when he asked for an attorney. That's what he testified. Then he says it was Ivan. Then he says it was Ivan who shot the people, or at the people. Because he told you that he believed that if he could convince them it was Ivan, they wouldn't charge him with murder. He told you that that's what he was thinking. And then he comes in now with what he told you on the stand. Do you have reason to believe that he may have lied about anything? Do you think that he had an incentive to say what he said? And we know that he's lied in the past. We know that he lied to try to stay out of trouble. We know that he said he was terrified of getting convicted of the same thing that Ivan's charged with. And, I mean, if you're on the fence about his credibility, we can just take a simple thing that I'm pretty sure you all picked up on he lied about. He said that he called Keisha before the shooting happened and told her how pissed off he was because Corey is foul. Right? Keisha said he didn't call her till after the shooting when he admitted his part in it. Without mentioning Ivan, without mentioning anyone named SD. In fact, Keisha doesn't know Ivan. She said she didn't know who he was then. She still doesn't know who he was. Mike called her and confessed, but never told her there was anyone else involved, or if there was, who it was. Mike called her repeated times to find out if Corey had been hit, because he didn't know if he was hit or not. Mike testified that he was pissed off when he found out that they had paid him in counterfeit money. And when he was testifying, he said, and that's when Ivan said, "You want me to do this?" And I was so pissed. I wanted him to shoot at him, and I said, "Yeah." That's what he said. And then when his mother testified right after that, she said that he called her crying and full of remorse and worry. It's a lot different than what he said. He went from, "I was pissed, I wanted them to get shot, and I was letting my cousin know I wanted that because her husband's foul." But now Mom says he was just full of remorse and sadness and crying when he called her to confess to her. I don't know. I don't know what the truth is of how he sounded or whatever. I mean, I thought Keisha was pretty credible. I think you could see Keisha had very little incentive to lie or to fudge the truth in any way or to make anything up. She's a widow because of what Mike was involved in. She's been dragged through this, losing her husband, knowing her own cousin did it. If anyone had incentive to want someone punished, it would be her. But she was completely honest with you guys. She told you. The only person she knows was involved in this is Mike. And when Mike tells a story, he can't even tell the truth about when he called the poor woman about this. If you think he's lied about anything, guys, you can disregard everything. That's the law. And if you disregard everything he said, there is absolutely no person you've heard from that says my client was there. Not one. You've heard no evidence or testimony from any person saying they saw him there. Now, I said some of the things that I told you in opening statements, some of the promises I made you, I broke those promises because they were based on my belief that you would hear from DeAndre Taylor. But I think everyone was probably, he was brought in here in a prison outfit and shackles and refused to testify. I can't talk about his credibility because there's nothing in evidence from him that is evidence. I couldn't cross-examine him like I promised because he didn't testify. And all those text messages and stuff, as the judge has instructed you, that we went through, and I tried to explain the best I could what it meant, aren't evidence. So nothing he said in those text messages is evidence for you guys. If you want to talk about incentives, he refuses to testify. He comes out in shackles. Mike testifies. He looked pretty good. Now, with some discussion with Her Honor and Mr. Hamner at this time, I would like to play for you just that brief little map video that they had a couple people go over with you. I don't have a copy with me of the actual exhibit, so Mr. Hamner is going to be nice enough to play it for you so I can talk about it.
Hold on a second.
Okay.
You can cue over.
Is it this one?
No, don't touch anything. No. All right, you ready?
I don't think I'm ever going to learn this stuff, guys.
Are you ready?
Yes.
Okay.
So this is the map that the experts went over to show you the locations. And as I think was brought out a couple of times, they show that Ivan's phone was not at his girlfriend's house after 11:30 or so that day. But it also shows that his phone never pinged in the area where the crime happened, which is, as you see in the left side, incident location, right? The green is Mike, and the blue is Ivan. I started off my opening statement at the end of it. I wanted you guys to look at this evidence and remember it because I think it's very, very important. The state says that this proves he wasn't at his girlfriend's. I said it looks to me like it also proves he wasn't at the crime scene. But then they said, well, if his phone was turned off, it wouldn't ping, or if he wasn't making calls or using it, it wouldn't ping. That might be, except for the fact that Amy told us that there's things going on a cell phone where they can pick up location other than the cell towers. And if his phone was turned off, it shouldn't have been registering anything. And then I asked her about iPhones and if they track your steps and things like that. And she said, yeah, they do. But that wasn't something that was provided to her. So she couldn't speak to that. And then when I asked her if she'd ever seen, could we go, I'm sorry, can I just go back to this? This report, we took a break and it was provided to her so she could look at it. steps were taken by whoever was holding Ivan's phone at that time at 2:11 p.m. That couldn't have happened if the phone was turned off. So this argument that his phone was turned off, at least shortly before this shooting occurred, because going to the 7-Eleven video, they say that the Mercedes in that video pulls in at like 2:14 p.m. When you watch the video, look for the timestamp. And the state told you that there was a window of time where there was no activity on Ivan's phone. And that window of time would have included 2:11 p.m. The phone wasn't turned off. She had to tell you that. So, once again, I'm going to ask you to make them prove things to you. If you have to believe that it's proof that he wasn't at his girlfriend's house because they don't have tower pings, but it's not proof that he wasn't at the crime scene because they don't have tower pings, and then when you find out that his phone was actually turned on, and there are ways of tracking it at that time, but that wasn't given to the person who testified until during trial, and that it confirms that it was turned on during that period, they say it must have been turned off. Once again, it's the opposite of your duty as jurors. If it proves he lied, it proves he wasn't there. You can't do it both ways. You can't say it matters for this but not for that. Because that theory that it was turned off is consistent with the idea that he's guilty. We don't convict people because they've done things consistent with. And interesting on that point, yesterday at the end of the day when my colleague was cross-examining the detective and asked about this cell phone stuff, he said that a cell phone would be pinging off of towers whether you were using it or not, as long as it was turned on, if you'll recall that. Now, that's different from what Ms. Tan said, because she said that the stuff that they showed you only registers for phone calls. And it was a little surprising to me, because they had that big list of text messages on that same thing. And I asked her, I said, so only phone calls and text messages would ping off these towers? And she said, no, only the phone calls. Right? That's different from what the detective said, because he said if the phone's on, it's pinging. Now, I don't know which, I don't know. I'm not an expert in that stuff. I defer to them. I don't know which one of them's accurate. I don't think either one of them were trying to be dishonest about it. But if you believe the detective, then they should have been able to trace his phone through that entire period, as long as it was turned on. She says it only picks up phone calls. I'm not sure, guys, but that's the state of the evidence. And what they both had to agree on is it never showed any activity on Ivan's phone at the crime scene that day, period. They both agreed on that. All right. 7-Eleven video. You can watch it. We've seen it. You can watch it over and over on a loop if you'd like. But in that video, what did we establish? We established that Ivan doesn't appear anywhere on the video. That was testified. He's not on that video. They said that there's a part of that video where the passenger's door opens and closes and proved that that's consistent with Ivan being there. Consistent with it. But it's also consistent with a person leaning through their own car and opening and closing a door, and they can't say it wasn't that. It's also consistent with it being a person other than Ivan that might have been in the car, which we don't know because you can't see in the video. It doesn't show anybody. So what does that video show? That video shows that Mike met them to do that drug deal the way he said. They did the drug deal. Mike, and Corey. They left, and then he leans into his car, the door opens and shuts a little bit, and he leaves. Now, I'm just going to throw this out there because this just came up yesterday, and it just kind of struck me. We're talking about all this stuff about reliability and credibility of witnesses and stuff like that. I think that it's pretty obvious to everybody here, and I think that I have maintained this from the gate, that people lie, right? And you got to look at what they're lying about and why, right? I've said from the gate, I've never denied that Ivan lied about being at his girlfriend's. I never denied that. We spent a lot of time trying to prove that he wasn't. And I told you from the beginning it was a lie. But why was he lying? Because his friend was arrested for murder and he's getting called in knowing he's being questioned for it. Right? But people lie for all kinds of reasons. And Sergeant Weiss, when he was testifying, he told you guys that he lied to Ivan during his interview to try to make him admit something. When he said, "You're lying because we have video and witnesses that saw you at the 7-Eleven." Right? That was not true. He said he knew nothing about the case. He said he was brought in to interview Ivan because Gomez was busy doing something different. And he admitted that when he made that statement to try to get Ivan to admit something, he didn't have the evidence he claimed he had. Now, there's nothing wrong with the police officer lying to a suspect in an interview. It's legal. It's a technique that's used all the time. So I'm not saying he did anything underhanded. But that's another reason to lie, right? To try to get someone to admit something. There's all kinds of reasons people lie. And it's not just, it's not just because they did something. Sometimes it's because they want something. And Mike said that they lied to him about certain evidence when they interviewed him. And he wound up confessing to his part and then going even further to lay it on someone else. Ivan never went for it. When they told him there was video, he said, "You're crazy," because it wasn't me. When they told him they had witnesses that saw him at that gas station, he goes, "I don't know what you're talking about because it wasn't me." The cop was doing a cop thing. Throw it out there, say we have proof, and see if you'll admit it. It's a police technique. And this whole thing about the text messages, I think I've gone over that as much as I can. It's very important because it is a difficult instruction to follow, but it's necessary. We don't use statements from people who aren't present as proof of anything. So when you look at those, not only do you have to try to remember that you don't have to follow anyone else's interpretation of that stuff. You use your own interpretation. But even if you know what it means or you think you know what it means, it's not evidence that it happened. And none of those statements that you saw, as was brought out, ever confesses to this crime, ever mentions this firearm being involved in a crime. It has to be interpreted, and the temptation is to interpret it to fit the narrative that it must have been talking about that stuff because Ivan must be guilty. Reverse presumption. Consistent with. That's just not what we do, guys. Now, I told you from the beginning, and when we're talking about the videos, right? They showed you a bunch of videos. Ivan with a gun, Ivan with a gun smoking pot, or Ivan singing rap songs, right? Now, it was introduced to you for the sole purpose of showing that Ivan had a gun, right? That was the evidentiary purpose of it. But I told you from the beginning that Ivan's guilty of being a stupid young man trying to act out, right? And these are not evidence. This is just demonstration. I just want to give you a kind of an idea of what I'm talking about. We're all aware of the hip-hop and the rap culture today. We know it's a thing, right? But the people who write songs about killing cops and stuff are not necessarily cop killers. That's Ice-T and Ice Cube back in the day when they were hardcore and they carried guns. And then that's Ice Cube on the Ellen DeGeneres show. And that's Ice-T on Law and Order, right? His song Cop Killer came out in 1992. And these guys are on Ellen, right? These are just a random collection of other hip-hop artists that are current today. They got guns. They're you know, look at it. It looks pretty similar to the stuff Ivan's throwing out there, right? Looking menacing isn't proof of anything either. It's consistent with. And I'm just going to talk about one more thing, I promise. I know I'm long-winded. My ex-wife told me to shut up all the time, but I got one more thing. And it's because it has to do with the instructions on the elements of the crime, right? What is murder? Deliberate, premeditated murder, right? Now, I didn't even, I don't believe, I submit to you that the evidence does not prove that Ivan is guilty of anything beyond a reasonable doubt, except hanging out with the wrong people and acting stupid. But you're going to be asked if whoever shot that car committed first-degree murder. And something struck me as they were presenting all the evidence. When they were doing the crime scene analysis and talking about the bullet entries and where they exited and all that sort of stuff, it struck me that there was only one bullet entry place on that car, and a flat tire that was probably shot, but the guy said he couldn't know that for sure. It was just consistent with someone shooting in that area. And what struck me was Michael said that Ivan fired 5 to 7 rounds in anger trying to kill these people. One bullet entered the trunk as far towards the back as you could get without busting the light out. One bullet probably hit the tire. Seems that if someone were trying to kill somebody in a car, they would shoot to where the people were. Whoever did this does not look like an attempt to kill anyone. Thank you for your patience, guys. I know it's been a long haul. I hope that you remember the things I said, and I hope that you read those instructions and follow them. I hope that you look at each piece of evidence and ask yourself if this has been proven beyond a reasonable doubt, or is it consistent with something? And remember your oath. You have to follow this instruction. You have to follow the instructions. You're the most important people here, because you're the people who make sure that we do not convict people of serious crimes or any crimes unless the state proves it beyond a reasonable doubt. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Scroggins. Mr. Hamner, your rebuttal.
Thank you. I just need one exhibit that was over there. Oh. Thanks so much. May I proceed, Your Honor?
Of course.
Thank you so much. So, ladies and gentlemen, like I told you at the beginning of this case, what did I say? It is really, really hard in this day and age to pull off the perfect crime in the digital age. That's what I said at the very beginning. And you've now been here. You've heard everything. And you know what? I stand by that statement. That's what the case has really demonstrated. In the olden days, you just had eyewitnesses. Well, we have those in this case. As time moved on and technology evolved, we started getting things like ballistics. We got that in this case. And then this tricky thing like the cell phone popped up, and the advent of social media popped up. And we certainly have a ton in this case. And what's so interesting about the cell phones and the social media is that those things are all unforced errors. That's on him. Mike didn't put them up to those texts. Didn't put them up to the social media post. He did that all on his own. Those were his choices. And he left them there. And now, it's all come home to roost. And that's the reality of this. It is really, really tough. When you start putting your faith in other people to pull off crimes, there's a possibility they may discuss the things that happened. If you send text messages to people, you may try to wipe them off your phone. But there's a chance that law enforcement looks at the other end of the phone and sees that you guys chatted. I'll give you a great example. Let's just talk about, we're going to talk about consciousness of guilt. Why don't we talk about text messages between the defendant and Ivan Andrews? You remember those. I pulled them. There's about 3 of them. Whose phone was it on? Michael Anderson's. Whose phone wasn't it on? Him. Why? The very last text text message, and I'm not even going to pull it because I don't have it here. The very last text message is the defendant saying, I'm on my way out. Right around the time that there are those two phone calls. Right around the time he said, that's about the time I was pulling up. And when you look at the video, that's those two of them merging. Why did he delete that? He's free for a couple of weeks. Why does he delete it? Because he knows. He's like, oops, better delete those texts from Michael Anderson. Don't want those on my phone. So he deletes them. Where did we hear that? Oh, we also heard it from Michael Anderson. And who did he delete it from? He deleted it from Corey. They both did the same thing. They were like, boy, for Mike, in that moment, the person who he didn't want to be near was Corey. He wipes it. Who does he not want to be near? Mike. He wipes it. But then, he's not smart enough to do things like when you're texting Jada and you're like, yo, if you go back there, I left my bullets in the sink, and get some intel from Mike. He forgot to delete it. That's on him. That's an unforced error. And that's consciousness of guilt. He's already thinking. And when you start to contrast that with his statement, like, I have no idea why I'm here, detective. And yet, at 5:30 at night on the day of the murder, you're trying to get intel from Mike? Why? About the mystery killing that you don't know about? You were Netflix and chilling over at Jada's house, right? How would you, why in the world, if you have no idea a killing went down on October 17th, why are you telling Jada to go back there and get intel from Mike? Why? Why? Because you were there. Because you were involved. Because you brought your gun, you brought your bullets. You sold your gun, but you left your bullets. Unforced error on him. No one else did that. It's just him. He should have deleted them. He forgot. Oops. But that's the reality of the digital age. That's what we've got here. Now, I want to cover a couple of things. We're going to first talk about reasonable doubt. Counsel put up a section of reasonable doubt. He didn't give you the full instruction. You have to look at all of it. The part he didn't provide you is that a reasonable doubt needs to be one based on reason. It's not mere possible doubt, but as such a doubt would govern or control a person in the more weighty affairs of life. And if in the minds of the juror, after comparison and consideration of all the evidence, are in such a condition that they can say and feel an abiding conviction of the truth of the charge, there's not a reasonable doubt. And here's interesting. It says here, doubt to be reasonable must be actual, not mere possibility or speculation. If a reasonable doubt as to the guilt of the defendant, he's entitled to a verdict of not guilty. I'll give you a great example. Think about counsel's argument near the end about the mystery third person. He says, isn't it possible that a third person was in there? Doubt to be reasonable must be actual, not mere possibility or speculation. There was no evidence in this case of a third person. Mike didn't see one. His mom didn't see one. There were no text messages recovered from anyone's phone to suggest a third person was involved. That is speculation. It ain't reasonable doubt. It's not a thing. Not in this case. Let's talk about the next instruction. And this is really, really important. There was so much talk about when you focus, they've got these big arguments about the gun. Well, you don't know definitively that this is the gun, and therefore, it's not a thing, and it's not a compelling argument. The problem with arguments like that is it's an exercise respectfully in willful blindness. You are avoiding all of the evidence in the case, and that's not what you are supposed to do as jurors. You're supposed to look at all of it. And that gets into circumstantial evidence. Because circumstantial evidence is that exercise of connecting the dots. It's about putting the pieces together. And it is things that we all do in our regular life. We do it in our jobs. We do it with our family. We do it when we're having conversations. We do it when we're driving around. We make conclusions all the time. And we don't need to necessarily be spoon-fed it. However, we have direct evidence in this case, and we're going to get to that in a second. But the law makes no distinction between the weight to be given in either direct or circumstantial evidence, and therefore, all of the evidence in the case, including the circumstantial evidence, should be considered by you in arriving at your verdict. I'm going to give you a great example. They talked about, in the text message, the phone movement, the CDRs. They're like, look, we concede. It shows that his phone never went to his girlfriend's house, but it doesn't show him at the murder scene. So if you assume, if you were going to accept the argument he didn't go to his girlfriend's, you must assume he wasn't at the murder scene. Wrong. Why? The evidence. Is the evidence that he is not at Jada's house only proven by the CDR records? Nope. We have his statement, I'm there, so he's locked in. They keep pressing him on it. Unlike Mike, who changes when confronted, he just doubles down. No, I'm at Melania Ross. That's the house. This is the address. Check it. That's where I was. There the whole day. Okay, fine. Let's start with that premise. We have CDR records showing he's not pinging them. Is that the only thing? Nope. What else do we have? Hit me up, babe. Babe, he is texting her. That is additional evidence that you can piece along with the CDR movement. There's two pieces of evidence of that. He says at a later point in the timeline, on my way to Granny's, not on my way to Jada's, on my way to Granny's, later on, after he's talking with Suave about trying to move the gun. Again, he doubled down with the not true statement of I'm at her house, but you have another piece of evidence to suggest he's not there. What else do you have? He's using his phone throughout the day. If he is at Melania Ross's house, all of those little blips should be at Melania's house. They're not. He is using his phone throughout the day. All of these pieces of evidence lead you to the conclusion that his alibi is 100% false. It's not one piece, it's a lot of pieces. And that is one of the issues with some of the arguments the defendant has raised in his closing. Because you can't just look at a piece of evidence in a vacuum. You must look at it collectively. Let's talk about the credibility and believability of a witness. Defense counsel got up here and showed this to you in its entirety initially. Near the end, he said, listen, if you believe that a witness has lied, you can throw it out. Quote unquote, that's the law. Wrong. That is not the law. Please look at this last paragraph. If you believe that a witness has lied about any material fact, you may disregard the entire testimony of that witness or any portion of his or her testimony which is not proved by other evidence. That's a big problem for the defense when you get to Michael Anderson. Because Michael Anderson took the stand and admitted, yeah, I totally lied to the police at the beginning. I flat out lied about being involved in the shooting. He actually then admits, well, I came clean about it later on, and I said I was scared of Ivan, and I do tell the truth about what happened. But here's the thing, and I totally agree. Don't take a witness at face value. Evaluate their motives and interests, and then try to see, does anything else check out what they said is true? So like when he says, hey, Ivan's on the phone the minute we get home, and he's talking, and someone's like, you got to get rid of that gun. He's blowing up DeAndre Taylor. How do we know that? We don't know it from Ivan. We know it from the phone records. So you have a way of checking it. You can't disregard it if it's proved by other evidence. Those phone records of his unforced errors, his choice to make those phone calls, corroborate, unfortunately for him, Michael Anderson. That's how this instruction works. So when Mike Anderson says, we went to the 7-Eleven, and there's a video of them at the 7-Eleven, you can't disprove it. I mean, you get to be the judge of credibility, but you've got to understand that's how this works. And when my co-counsel got up and went over text message and phone call and video and this and that, showing how he is corroborated, evaluate that. Now, contrast that to the defendant's statement of, hey, I was at Melania Ross's house. There was no other evidence that corroborated that. So what does the instruction say if someone's not telling the truth about a material fact? You put it together. Because that's not checking out. There was a point made by defense counsel where he said, well, you know, that's just him kind of lying because he's scared. Respectfully, that is just the argument of counsel. That is just the argument of counsel. That statement, his opinion as to why he did it, is just his counsel's opinion. That's not the evidence. So, think about that for a second. I want to make clear about, here's something also really important as far as instructions. This instruction says you must bring your everyday common sense. You don't check it off at the door. So when things don't add up, use your common sense. And when things add up, use your common sense. And it says you may draw reasonable inferences from the evidence which you feel are justified. So all this talk about, like, I'll give you a great example. You know, if you don't have the person on the stand telling you exactly what they wrote in a text message, you can't assume anything about it. And now I want to talk about the actual text message instruction. He kept saying over and over again the text messages weren't evident. That is not what this instruction says. It says, in the course of this trial, you've been provided text messages between the defendant and other individuals. You were instructed that the content of the text messages from individuals other than the defendant are not evidence, and you may consider them for truth or falsehood for the matter asserted in the statements. The sole purpose of the text message is to show the effect, if any, that that statement had on the defendant, and for no other purpose. The reason why they're relevant is you get to see when they type something, what's his reaction. So you don't just throw it away. And here's the other thing. You get to use your common sense when you hear things like, I don't know, if a text message says ATP. If your common sense and your own personal experience leads you to it, that means at this point, or contextually, that seems to be what it means. You get to use your common sense. And here's the other thing. Speaking of Miss Tan, she was an expert. And we've got an instruction about experts. And what does it say? An expert witness may give his or her opinion, it doesn't say his, but if her it should, his or her opinion as to any matter in which he or she is skilled. You should consider such expert opinion and weigh the reasons, if any, for giving it. You're not bound by such an opinion. Give it the way you deem entitled. So here's the thing. If this lady tells you, like for years, all I do is comb through text messages and have to read through text message shorthand, and she testifies, in my opinion, based on all of my experience, ATP means at this point, and IDK means I don't know. You can, if you wish, accept that based on her training. You can also use your common sense. And honestly, when you look at all these text messages, you don't need to be an expert to figure out the gist of this conversation, any of those conversations. It's abundantly clear what he was doing in the moments after he realized he shot and killed Corey Jones.